A homeless veteran and his dog saved an old woman, then inherited her mysterious cabin. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the heart of this story. It all began on a stormy night in a small, quiet town. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain battered against the windows of the abandoned buildings lining the streets. Nolan Creed, a homeless veteran, walked through the empty town with his loyal dog, Ash. The 40-year-old combat veteran, weathered by years of hardship, carried the weight of both his past and his current struggles. His face was rugged, a testament to the battles he had fought, both on the field and in his mind. His clothes were tattered, his boots worn down, but there was a certain quiet strength about him that came from surviving in the harshest conditions. Ash, a 6-year-old German shepherd, was his constant companion. The dog's amber eyes were sharp and alert, always aware of his surroundings. They had been through a lot together, and despite their struggles, there was an unspoken bond between them, one forged in loyalty, survival, and the silent understanding that they were in this together. As they trudged through the rain, they spotted a dim light flickering in the distance. It was the only sign of life in the desolate town. The small bakery, Sugar Pine Bakery, stood like a lone beacon in the storm. The sign above the door swayed in the wind, creaking under the pressure of the gusts. Nolan's tired eyes lingered on the warm glow coming from the bakery's windows. It had been a long day, and though he wasn't one to ask for help, he couldn't ignore the pull of that warmth. They approached cautiously, the sounds of the storm muffled by the thick walls of the building. Ash's ears perked up as they neared the door, his nose twitching in the air. The dog's instincts had always been sharp, and he wasn't about to let his guard down, even in this quiet town. As they reached the door, the bell above it rang with a soft chime. The door creaked open slowly, and there, standing in the doorway, was an elderly woman, barely 5 feet tall. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her eyes were sharp despite her age. Mabel Halloway, the owner of Sugar Pine Bakery, had been through many storms in her life, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen. She had been alone in her bakery, the storm outside cutting her off from the rest of the world. But when Nolan and Ash appeared, something inside her stirred. She knew, deep down, that they were the answer to a prayer she had silently made for someone to help her in her time of need. Without hesitation, Nolan stepped inside, the warmth of the bakery enveloping him like a blanket. He felt a momentary sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in years. He removed his soaked poncho and set it aside, allowing the warmth to soak into his bones. Mabel offered him a cup of tea, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. The storm raged on, but inside the bakery, time slowed. Mabel's gentle voice filled the air as she spoke, offering comfort in a way that only someone with a lifetime of wisdom could. As they sat together, the bond between them grew, and Mabel knew that this meeting wasn't a coincidence. She had been waiting for someone to come into her life and change it in ways she couldn't yet understand. Little did she know, this encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything for both of them, and for the small bakery that had stood the test of time in the heart of the storm. The next morning, Nolan woke to the soft hum of the bakery's old coffee machine, its comforting aroma filling the air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, silver-gray world. The wind had calmed, and the once chaotic town of Northwind Bay had returned to its usual stillness. Outside, the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a soft light across the cobblestone streets. Nolan stretched, his body sore from the night's restless sleep on the bakery's worn couch. Ash was curled up beside him, still deep in slumber, his chest rising and falling steadily. The peacefulness of the moment felt almost surreal, like a world Nolan hadn't known in years. For a man used to surviving on his own, this rare sense of comfort was unfamiliar, yet welcome. Mabel, having prepared some breakfast, entered the room with a warm smile, her silver hair neatly tied back. She had a gentle grace about her, the kind that came from years of living a life that balanced both hardship and joy. I thought you might want some coffee, she said softly, setting the mug down on the small table next to him. Nolan smiled in gratitude, taking the steaming cup into his hands. Thanks, he replied, his voice rough from the dry air and long hours on the road. Mabel sat across from him, her eyes glinting with a mix of wisdom and curiosity. So, what brings a man like you to a place like this? She asked, her tone warm yet probing. Nolan hesitated for a moment, then shrugged, looking down at his coffee. Just passing through, he said quietly. He didn't feel ready to share his full story with her, not yet. The war had left him with more scars than he cared to count, both inside and out. He didn't talk much about the things he had done, the lives he had lost, or the demons that still haunted him. But something in Mabel's kind eyes made him feel like it was safe to be here, to rest for just a little while. Well, you've found a safe place here, Mabel said, her voice soft but firm. This old bakery has seen its fair share of storms, and I reckon it's ready to take care of a few more. Nolan glanced around the bakery, taking in the shelves lined with old cookbooks, the worn wooden counter that had been polished over decades, and the faint scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air. It was a place that had been loved and cared for, and it made him feel something he hadn't in a long time: hope. As the morning light grew brighter, Mabel led Nolan to the back of the bakery, where she kept the storage area. It was a small room, packed with bags of flour, sugar, and various baking tools. But as Mabel moved a stack of old crates, Nolan noticed something strange. A door, hidden beneath the shelves, its surface worn with age. That's where the real magic happens, Mabel said with a twinkle in her eye. She reached for a rusty key hanging on a hook, and with a click, the door swung open. Inside, Nolan was surprised to find a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. What is this? Nolan asked, his curiosity piqued. Mabel smiled mysteriously. A little secret, she said, but I think you're ready to see it. She gestured for him to follow, and without hesitation, Nolan stepped inside. The air grew cooler as they descended, the faint scent of old wood and earth filling his senses. At the bottom of the stairs, they reached a small room with stone walls and a low ceiling. It was dimly lit, but enough light filtered through the cracks to reveal what lay inside. There, in the center of the room, stood a large chest. It was old, its surface covered in dust, but the intricate carvings on the wood suggested it was something special. This chest has been in my family for generations, Mabel explained. And now it's yours. Nolan's heart raced as he approached the chest, his fingers grazing the surface. He had no idea what was inside, but something told him that whatever it was more than just a treasure. It was a key, something that would unlock a part of his past he had long forgotten. Why me? Nolan asked, turning to Mabel. She smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. Because, Nolan, sometimes the right person comes along at just the right time. And you've earned this. With that, she stepped back, giving him space to open the chest. Nolan took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, he found a collection of old papers, a few photographs, and a small, faded letter. The photographs were of Mabel's family, her late husband, and the town of Northwind Bay from decades ago. But what caught Nolan's eye was a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath the pile. He carefully picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. This is for you to understand, Mabel said quietly. The journal holds the history of this bakery, my family, and a promise that was made long ago. Nolan looked at Mabel, her face filled with a mix of sadness and hope. Hey, promise? He asked. Mabel nodded. It's time you knew. As Nolan sat in the dimly lit room beneath the bakery, his fingers gently traced the worn edges of the journal that Mabel had handed him. The soft rustle of paper was the only sound that broke the silence between them. He could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet urgency that seemed to fill the air. The journal in his hands was more than just pages bound together. It was a key to something much larger, something he could hardly comprehend. Mabel watched him closely, her eyes full of unspoken stories, waiting for him to begin. Slowly, Nolan opened the journal, revealing the first page. The handwriting was delicate, faded with age, but clear enough to read. It began simply. The story of Sugar Pine Bakery. The words seemed to hold a promise, one that stretched far beyond the walls of the bakery and the storm they had survived the night before. Nolan turned the page, and the words began to flow. The journal told of a time long before Mabel had ever set foot in the bakery. It spoke of her grandfather, a man who had come to Northwind Bay in the early 1900s, bringing with him not just recipes, but a vision. The bakery, as it turned out, was no ordinary place. Mabel's grandfather had built it not just to serve the people of the town, but as a refuge for those in need. He believed that food could heal more than just hunger. It could heal hearts, mend souls, and bring people together in ways nothing else could. Mabel's grandfather had a special gift, a rare and nearly forgotten knowledge of plants and herbs, which he used to create pastries that were said to have restorative properties. It was said that anyone who ate one of his treats would feel a sense of peace, as if their burdens had been lifted, if only for a moment. But there was a darker side to this gift. As Nolan read on, he discovered that Mabel's grandfather had not been the only one with such abilities. Over the years, other people had come to Northwind Bay, each with their own secrets, each carrying a part of the puzzle that would eventually lead to the bakery's true legacy. The journal spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the bakery, a place where the most precious recipes were stored, guarded by a set of rules that only those who truly understood the power of the bakery could access. Mabel's grandfather had left these instructions for his descendants, ensuring that the bakery would always remain a place of healing and sanctuary. The journal also spoke of a promise made long ago, a promise to pass the bakery on to someone who would continue the work. It was clear now why Mabel had given him the journal, why she had trusted him with this secret. He was the one she had been waiting for. The air in the room seemed to thicken as Nolan read the final pages, which spoke of the inheritance, a power greater than anything Nolan had ever known. Mabel's grandfather had left behind not just a bakery, but a legacy of kindness, healing, and hope. The journal ended with a note in the corner of the last page, written in a shaky hand. The time has come. The heir must unlock the bakery's true gift. Nolan closed the journal slowly, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of what he had just read settling into his chest. The bakery, the hidden chamber, the promise, it was all so much to take in. But one thing was clear. Mabel had chosen him, and with that choice came a responsibility he hadn't expected. He looked up at Mabel, who had been quietly watching him. Her eyes were filled with an understanding that seemed to reach far beyond the moment. "So what now?" Nolan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mabel smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. "Now, you begin the journey," she said gently. "You will find the chamber beneath the bakery, and when you do, you will unlock the gift that has been waiting for generations. It's not just about the bakery or the recipes. It's about the people who come here, the ones who need what we have to offer. And it's about finding the peace we've all been searching for." Nolan felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. It wasn't fear or uncertainty. It was a quiet acceptance, as if he had always known this moment would come. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within him was just beginning. With the journal in his hands and the weight of Mabel's words on his heart, Nolan stood up. Ash, who had been lying quietly by the door, lifted his head, sensing the change. Together, they walked back into the main bakery, the morning light filtering through the windows and casting a golden glow over the worn countertops. As Nolan looked around, he realized that this place, this humble bakery, was no longer just a stop on his journey. It was his new beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to uncover the mysteries that lay beneath the surface, ready to unlock the true gift of Sugar Pine Bakery. Nolan stood in the heart of Sugar Pine Bakery, the journal still clutched tightly in his hands. He had been reading it for hours, piecing together the cryptic words left by Mabel's grandfather. Every page felt like it was guiding him towards something important, something that could change everything. The storm had passed, and the sun was now shining brightly through the bakery's windows. But inside, Nolan could feel the weight of the secrets buried beneath this small, unassuming building. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for him to take the next step. Ash, who had been lying quietly by the door, stood up and stretched, sensing that something was about to happen. Nolan looked down at the dog, who wagged his tail slightly, as if encouraging him to move forward. With a deep breath, Nolan walked over to the far corner of the bakery, where the hidden door was. He had never noticed it before, but now that he knew it was there, it seemed to beckon him. The journal had spoken of this door, of the passage that led to the hidden chamber beneath the bakery, where the true gift of the bakery was kept. It wasn't just about the pastries or the recipes. It was about something much deeper, something that had the power to heal and change lives. Nolan crouched down and pressed his hand against the door, feeling the cool, weathered wood beneath his fingers. He could hear his heart beating in his ears, the anticipation thick in the air. Slowly, he inserted the rusty key into the lock, the metal scraping as it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled down into the darkness. He hesitated for a moment, then glanced at Ash, who was already descending the stairs. With a final look at the bakery, Nolan followed. The air grew cooler as they made their way down, the only sound the soft click of Ash's paws on the wooden steps. The passage seemed to go on forever, but eventually, they reached the bottom. Nolan shined his flashlight around the room, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with old jars and bottles, each labeled with names and dates. The room smelled of earth and herbs, a mix of something ancient and powerful. In the center of the room, there was a large, wooden chest, its surface worn with age. It was unlike anything Nolan had ever seen. He approached the chest carefully, his pulse quickening. The journal had described it in detail, but seeing it in person was different. It felt real now, like something that had been waiting for him. With trembling hands, he opened the chest, revealing a collection of objects that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. There were several small vials filled with liquid, each one a different color, and a handful of strange, intricately carved stones. But what caught Nolan's eye was a small, ornate box resting at the bottom. It was made of dark wood, with delicate carvings along the edges. It seemed to hum with energy, and Nolan felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over him as he touched it. He opened the box slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside was a single object, a key, its metal glinting in the dim light. It was beautiful, its surface covered in intricate designs, and it felt heavy in his hand. Nolan stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand its significance. This was the key to the bakery's true gift, the journal had said. But what did it unlock? What was he supposed to do with it? Just then, a voice broke through his thoughts. "It's time," Mabel's voice echoed in the chamber, though she wasn't there. It was as if the very walls had absorbed her words, passing them on to him. Nolan turned toward the source of the voice, his heart racing. "It's time to open the door," the voice repeated. Nolan looked down at the key in his hand, then back at the shelves filled with jars and bottles. The answer was there, waiting for him to understand. With newfound resolve, he stepped forward, the key now pulsing with energy. He placed it in a hidden slot in the wall, just to the left of the chest. There was a click, and suddenly, the wall slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, glowing crystal, its light bright enough to fill the room. It was unlike anything Nolan had ever seen, its surface smooth and unblemished, radiating warmth and peace. He reached for it, and as his fingers brushed against the crystal, he felt a surge of energy course through him. The room seemed to come alive, the air thick with a sense of healing and power. He closed his eyes, allowing the feeling to wash over him. When he opened them again, he saw Ash standing beside him, looking up at the crystal with an expression of understanding. It was as if the dog knew exactly what had just happened. "This is it," Nolan whispered, his voice filled with awe. The bakery's true gift had been unlocked. But what did it mean for him, for Mabel, and for the town of Northwind Bay? He didn't know yet. But he knew one thing for sure. The journey was far from over. And whatever happened next, he was ready to face it. As Nolan stood in the dimly lit chamber beneath Sugar Pine Bakery, the glowing crystal in his hand pulsed with an energy that was both unfamiliar and comforting. The room seemed to hum with life, the air thick with a sense of purpose that Nolan couldn't quite understand. The crystal, which had once been hidden away in a secret compartment behind the bakery's walls, was now the key to something much larger than he had anticipated. Ash, still by his side, looked up at the crystal with an almost knowing gaze, his amber eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Nolan had always trusted Ash's instincts, and he could feel the weight of the moment, the feeling that something had changed, that they were on the verge of uncovering something extraordinary. "This is it," Nolan whispered, his voice thick with awe. The power in the room was undeniable, but what did it all mean? What was he supposed to do with this gift? He glanced at the shelves filled with jars, bottles, and strange herbs, and then back at the crystal. It was as if it was waiting for him to make the next move, to unlock its true potential. Nolan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. He stepped forward, holding the crystal in both hands, and placed it on the wooden pedestal in the center of the room. The moment he set it down, the crystal began to glow brighter, its light casting long shadows across the walls. A soft, melodic hum filled the air, and Nolan felt a shift in the atmosphere, as if the very foundation of the bakery had come alive. The shelves creaked, and the air seemed to stir, swirling around him like a gentle breeze. Then, with a sudden rush, the room seemed to open up. Nolan blinked, trying to comprehend what was happening. The walls began to fade, revealing a new space beyond the chamber. A vast, expansive room filled with ancient books, scrolls, and artifacts. This was the hidden heart of the bakery, the place where its true gift had been kept for generations. It was a library, but not just any library. The shelves were lined with books that seemed to glow with their own inner light, their pages filled with knowledge that had been passed down through the ages. Some of the books were bound in leather, while others were made of delicate parchment, their edges worn with age. Nolan's heart raced as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning the shelves, feeling the weight of the knowledge contained within these walls. He reached for one of the books, its cover embossed with gold letters, and carefully opened it. The pages were filled with intricate drawings, symbols, and diagrams, each one telling a story of healing, transformation, and renewal. These weren't just recipes or instructions. They were the keys to understanding the power that had been passed down through generations. Nolan's fingers trembled as he turned the pages, absorbing the information like a sponge. The deeper he read, the more he realized that this wasn't just about the bakery. It was about something much larger, something that could change not only his life, but the lives of everyone in Northwind Bay. As he turned the final page of the book, he found a note, written in a script he didn't recognize. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. The gift is not to be kept for oneself. It must be shared with the world. Nolan closed the book, his mind racing. The weight of the responsibility was heavy, but he knew what he had to do. The bakery, the crystal, the journal, it was all leading him to this moment. He wasn't just the keeper of this knowledge. He was the key to unlocking its true potential. But how? How was he supposed to share this gift with the world? As if in response to his question, the walls of the room began to shift again, revealing a new doorway. It was a small, unassuming door, but Nolan could feel its significance. He walked toward it, Ash following closely behind. As he opened the door, he found himself standing in the heart of the bakery, back where it all began. The sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting a golden glow over the countertops. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt like it had returned to normal. But Nolan knew it hadn't. The journey had only just begun. He had a gift now, a gift that could heal, restore, and transform. And it was his responsibility to make sure it wasn't wasted. He looked down at Ash, who was now sitting quietly beside him, his tail wagging slowly. "It's time, boy," Nolan whispered. "We've got work to do." With a sense of purpose, Nolan walked toward the back of the bakery, where the hidden chamber had once been. The gift was no longer a secret. It was time to share it with the world, starting with the people of Northwind Bay. The bakery, once a humble shop, had now become a beacon of hope, a place where healing could begin and where miracles could unfold. Nolan knew that, with Ash by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would bring the gift of Sugar Pine Bakery to the world, one person at a time. Nolan stood behind the counter of Sugar Pine Bakery, his hands moving instinctively as he worked, the rhythmic motions of kneading dough and preparing pastries feeling strangely familiar now. The once humble bakery had transformed, both inside and out, and so had he. The journal had set him on a path he never anticipated, and now, as he looked around at the bustling bakery filled with the delicious scent of fresh bread and pastries, he knew the journey was far from over. The crystal, the books, the secret chamber, everything had led to this moment. The gift he had unlocked wasn't just about the recipes or the bakery itself. It was about the people who would walk through the door, seeking comfort, healing, or a simple meal. With each passing day, more and more townspeople arrived, drawn to the bakery by rumors of its miraculous ability to heal and soothe. They came with broken hearts, worn-out souls, or just the weight of everyday life pressing down on them. And every single one left with a sense of peace, as though the bakery had touched something deep within them. Ash, who had become more than just a companion, stood by Nolan's side, his amber eyes scanning the room, always alert, always protective. The dog had a way of knowing when someone was in need, and it seemed to Nolan that Ash had become a guardian of sorts, not just of the bakery, but of the people who came there. It was as if the bond between them had strengthened, as if the true power of the bakery was alive in both of them. As the days passed, Nolan couldn't help but notice how things had changed in the town. The atmosphere in Northwind Bay felt different now, lighter, more hopeful. People smiled at one another more often, and the small, everyday struggles seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a sense of community that had been missing for so long. Nolan knew that he had a part to play in this transformation. It wasn't just about baking or running a business. It was about creating a space where people could come and leave better than they arrived. Mabel had always believed that food could heal, but Nolan had come to understand that it wasn't just the food. It was the care, the love, and the energy that went into it. One morning, as he was finishing up a batch of cinnamon rolls, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Lena Fox, the local park ranger, who had stopped by a few times since the bakery had opened. She was a woman of few words, but her smile was warm, and her presence comforting. "Morning, Nolan," she said, her voice calm, yet filled with a quiet intensity. "How's the bakery holding up?" Nolan wiped his hands on his apron, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Better than I ever imagined," he said, his voice sincere. "It's more than just baking here, Lena. It's something bigger. People come in for bread, but they leave with something they didn't expect." Lena nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I can see that," she said, glancing around the room. "I've seen it in the town. There's a shift. People are different. I don't know if it's the bakery or something else, but I know things are changing." Nolan felt a sense of pride swell within him. The bakery had become more than just a place to get food. It had become a sanctuary for those in need of something deeper, something they didn't even realize they were missing. "I think it's both," Nolan replied, his gaze meeting hers. "The bakery is just the beginning. The real gift is in the people who walk through that door. They bring their stories, their struggles, and then they leave with something that's hard to put into words." Lena smiled and walked over to the counter, taking a seat on one of the stools. "I've been meaning to tell you something, Nolan," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "There's been some talk around town about what you're doing here. People say there's something special about this place, like it's more than just a bakery. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of people who seem to have found a new sense of hope since you opened this place." Nolan nodded slowly, his fingers idly flipping through the pages of the journal that lay on the counter. He had noticed the change in the people, and he had felt it in himself too. Something about the bakery, about the gift it carried, was beginning to change the very fabric of Northwind Bay. "I didn't expect any of this," Nolan said, his voice quiet. "I thought I was just running a bakery. But now, I see it's more than that. This place, it's healing people. It's giving them something they didn't know they needed." Lena looked at him, her gaze steady. "It's giving them hope, Nolan," she said softly. "And that's something this town has needed for a long time." As the day went on, Nolan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bakery was no longer just a place to bake. It had become a symbol of healing, of restoration, and of hope. It had the power to change lives, and Nolan was just beginning to understand how. Later that afternoon, as he stood behind the counter, watching people come and go, Nolan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This was his new life, and it was far from what he had expected. But as he watched Ash settle by the door, keeping watch over the bakery, Nolan knew one thing for sure. This was where he was meant to be. And no matter what came next, he was ready to face it, with Ash by his side and the bakery's gift to guide him. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of purpose that Nolan had never experienced before. The bakery continued to be a place of healing for Northwind Bay, but now, it had become something even more powerful. Word had spread across town about the magical atmosphere inside Sugar Pine Bakery. and more people were visiting than ever before. They came from all walks of life, some simply for a warm meal, others seeking something more, the kind of peace they hadn't known they needed. For Nolan, every person who walked through that door added another layer to the story that was unfolding, a story he hadn't expected to be part of but couldn't ignore. Each new visitor brought their own energy, their own history, and by the time they left, there was always a visible change, a quiet calm, a lightness in their step. It wasn't just the food. It was something deeper, something almost spiritual that flowed through the bakery and into the hearts of those who entered. It became clear to Nolan that he wasn't just running a business. He was part of something bigger. As the weeks passed, the transformation in Northwind Bay continued. People smiled at one another more often. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years began to reconnect. And though the town still faced challenges, there was an undeniable shift, a collective sense of hope that was spreading, like a wildfire of positivity. One evening, as Nolan cleaned up after the last customer had left for the day, he sat in the bakery, reflecting on everything that had happened. The warm glow of the oven, the smell of fresh bread, and the gentle hum of the old refrigerator were all comforting, familiar sounds. But there was a quiet sense of something coming, a feeling that the bakery's true purpose was still unfolding. That night, as Nolan stood in front of the counter, Ash beside him, a figure entered the bakery. It was Lena Fox, the park ranger, who had become a regular visitor since the bakery's reopening. Her presence was steady, grounded, and Nolan always felt a sense of calm whenever she arrived. She had become one of the town's most vocal supporters of the bakery and its ability to heal, and Nolan had come to value her wisdom. "Evening, Nolan," Lena said, her voice as calm and reassuring as always. "Evening, Lena," Nolan replied with a smile. "How's the town?" Lena paused, glancing around the bakery with a soft smile of her own. "It's changed," she said simply. "Not just the bakery, but the whole town. People are starting to believe again." "Believe in what?" Nolan asked, his curiosity piqued. Lena leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "Believe that things can get better. Believe that kindness matters. Believe that even in the hardest times, we can come together and make it through. This bakery, it's doing something people didn't know they needed." Nolan nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the journal and the crystal that had unlocked all of this. He realized that he wasn't just feeding the town physically. He was feeding their spirits, giving them something they had lost along the way, a sense of connection, of community, of belonging. "I didn't expect any of this," Nolan admitted, his voice low. "I thought I was just running a bakery." "You are," Lena said with a gentle laugh. "But you're doing more than that. You're bringing people together. You're healing the town, one loaf of bread at a time." Nolan smiled at that, but his smile quickly faded as he glanced toward the back of the bakery. Something was different tonight. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place. "Something's coming," Nolan said, more to himself than to Lena. Lena followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "I think you're right. There's more to this bakery than we know. More to you, too." Nolan stared at the door leading to the hidden chamber beneath the bakery. It was as if the bakery was calling him, urging him to take the next step, to unlock its next secret. "What do you think it is?" Nolan asked, turning back to Lena. She shrugged slightly, her face thoughtful. "I'm not sure, but I believe the bakery knows. And I believe you do, too. You just have to listen." Nolan thought about that for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. He had listened before, when the journal had called to him, when the crystal had pulsed with energy, when Mabel had passed the bakery on to him. But now, he could feel something more stirring within him, something deep inside that told him the next chapter of this story was about to begin. "I think you're right," he said finally. "It's time to listen." With that, Nolan stood, a newfound determination filling him. He looked at Lena, who gave him a nod of encouragement. Together, they walked to the back of the bakery, where the door to the hidden chamber awaited. As Nolan placed his hand on the door, he felt the familiar hum of energy course through him. The bakery was more than just a building. It was alive, a living, breathing entity that had been waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment had come. With a deep breath, Nolan turned the handle and stepped inside, ready to uncover whatever lay ahead. Nolan stepped into the hidden chamber beneath Sugar Pine Bakery, the air cool and heavy with the scent of earth and age. As the door creaked closed behind him, The flickering glow of the crystal seemed to illuminate the room with an almost ethereal light. He glanced around, taking in the shelves lined with ancient books, jars filled with dried herbs, and faded maps that seemed to whisper of secrets long buried. This place felt timeless, as if it had been waiting for him. He could sense that the bakery's true power wasn't just in the pastries or the healing energy it emitted. It was here, in this chamber, where the heart of the bakery's gift was kept. Ash, ever faithful, padded silently beside him, his ears alert, nose twitching as he sensed the change in the atmosphere. Nolan's fingers grazed the spines of the books, feeling their age and wisdom. The journal had spoken of a hidden legacy, but now that he was standing here, it felt as though the words were no longer enough. The knowledge wasn't just in the pages, it was in the very air around him, waiting to be unlocked. Nolan's gaze moved to the far corner of the room, where a large stone altar stood, surrounded by faded candles. On the altar lay a delicate box, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. The journal had mentioned this box, but its significance had never been clear until now. His pulse quickened as he approached, the weight of the moment settling on him. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. Carefully, he lifted the box, feeling its cool surface against his fingertips. It was surprisingly light, yet the energy it radiated was unmistakable. Nolan hesitated for only a moment before opening it. Inside was a collection of small vials filled with various liquids, each one a different shade of gold, amber, or deep green. They seemed to shimmer with their own inner light, their contents swirling in ways that Nolan couldn't fully comprehend. The journal had spoken of these vials, too, but it hadn't explained their purpose. Now, standing before them, Nolan could feel their power, as if they were calling to him. But how? And why? He looked around the chamber, as though searching for an answer in the shadows. That's when he noticed something strange. Etched into the stone wall behind the altar were words, written in the same script as the journal. The writing was faded, nearly unreadable, but Nolan's instincts told him this was the key. He stepped closer, his heart racing as he traced the words with his eyes. The gift must be shared, the inscription read. To heal, to restore, to awaken. The one who understands the gift must offer it freely, without fear, and without hesitation. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. The words echoed in his mind as if they were meant just for him. This was what he had been waiting for, what Mabel had entrusted to him. The bakery, the crystal, the hidden chamber, it was all part of the same plan. It was all leading him to this moment. With a deep breath, Nolan turned back to the box. He carefully picked up one of the vials, its amber liquid glowing softly in the dim light. He felt an overwhelming sense of purpose wash over him, a quiet knowing that this was what he was meant to do. Without another thought, he opened the vial and poured its contents into the center of the altar. The liquid shimmered as it touched the stone, swirling and sparkling as if it were alive. As soon as it made contact, the chamber seemed to hum with energy, the very walls vibrating with an almost musical resonance. Nolan stepped back, his breath catching in his throat as he watched in awe. The air around him seemed to shift, becoming warmer, richer, as if the room itself was breathing. The candles flickered to life, their flames dancing in the stillness, casting long shadows on the walls. Ash growled softly, his amber eyes fixed on the altar, watching the transformation unfold. Nolan felt a strange pull in his chest, a connection between him and the energy in the room. It was as if the bakery itself was reaching out to him, guiding him toward the next step. The vials, each one a different color, each one a different energy, had been meant for this moment. But why? What was he supposed to do next? As if in answer, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble, ever so slightly, and the stone altar shifted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath it. Nolan knelt down, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached into the compartment and pulled out a small, weathered book, its cover adorned with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The book was old, older than anything he had ever touched. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the missing link to understanding the bakery's true power. Nolan opened the book, and as his eyes scanned the first few pages, the words seemed to jump off the page. It was more than just a record of recipes or ingredients. It was a manual, a guide to using the bakery's gift. It spoke of healing, of connecting with the people who came to the bakery, and of sharing the energy in ways that could change lives. But it also warned of the responsibility that came with the gift. It was a power that had to be used wisely, with care and compassion, or else it could consume the one who wielded it. Nolan closed the book, a deep sense of resolve settling in his chest. This was his path now. The bakery's true purpose had been revealed, and it was up to him to carry it forward. With Ash at his side, he stood up, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The gift was no longer a secret. It was time to share it, to heal, and to restore the town of Northwind Bay. Nolan walked back toward the bakery's main room, the book in hand and the vials still glowing softly. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt at peace. The bakery had shown him the way forward, and he was ready to walk it. As the days passed, Nolan continued to run the bakery with a newfound sense of purpose, his connection to the bakery's gift growing stronger with each passing day. People kept coming, drawn by the whispers of healing and hope that seemed to radiate from the bakery itself. And each person who walked through the door left with something more than just a loaf of bread or a pastry. They left with a sense of peace, a warmth that seemed to stay with them long after they had stepped out into the world again. Nolan couldn't explain it, but he didn't need to. He just knew it was working. The town had changed. People who had been isolated, weighed down by the burdens of their own lives, were now beginning to reconnect. Families that had drifted apart were coming together again. Neighbors who had once avoided each other were now sharing stories over coffee, and there was a quiet sense of unity that hadn't existed before. It wasn't just the food. It was the energy that Nolan had tapped into, the gift of the bakery that was now a part of him. Yet, as the town healed, Nolan felt a strange unease. The more he embraced the gift, the more he felt a responsibility weighing on him. The book, the journal, the crystal, they all spoke of the power that came with the bakery, and the warnings were clear. This gift was not something to be taken lightly. It had to be shared, yes, but it also had to be protected. He couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. Late one evening, as Nolan closed up the bakery for the night, he noticed a figure standing outside, silhouetted by the fading light. At first, he thought it was just a passerby, someone out for a walk in the quiet town, but something about the figure felt different, unnerving, even. The figure stepped closer, and Nolan could make out the outline of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark coat that seemed out of place in the small town. He stopped just short of the door, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Evening," Nolan called, his voice steady, though he couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that settled in his chest. The man gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. "Evening," he replied, his voice deep, with an edge of something Nolan couldn't quite place. "I've heard a lot about this place," the man continued, his gaze flicking toward the bakery's warm interior. "Seems like people are saying you've got something special here." Nolan didn't reply immediately. There was something about the man's tone that made him uneasy. "We've got good food, that's all," Nolan said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Nothing more to it." The man didn't seem convinced. "Oh, I'm sure there's more to it than that." He stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply on the wooden floor of the porch. "You don't mind if I have a look around, do you?" Nolan's pulse quickened, his instincts telling him that this man wasn't just a stranger looking for a warm meal. There was something in his eyes, something calculating, that made Nolan step back. "I'm afraid the bakery's closed for the night," Nolan said, his voice firm now. "You're welcome to come back tomorrow." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Nolan thought he saw a flicker of frustration cross the stranger's face. But then, just as quickly, the man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Tomorrow will be too late," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Nolan's throat tightened as he tried to make sense of the situation. The man's presence was unsettling, like a shadow hanging over him. "I don't know who you are," Nolan replied, his voice steady, but the unease in his chest was growing stronger. The man leaned in slightly, his eyes locking with Nolan's. "I know exactly what this bakery is, what it can do." Nolan's heart raced. The man knew about the gift. "How?" "I think you should leave," Nolan said, his voice sharp now. The stranger's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll see me again," he said cryptically, before turning and walking away into the night, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Nolan stood there for a moment, his mind racing. Who was that man? And how did he know about the bakery's power? The gift Nolan had unlocked had already changed the town, but now, it seemed like something darker was beginning to stir. He wasn't sure what the stranger wanted, but one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. The bakery's magic was no longer a secret, and with it came a new kind of danger. Nolan looked down at Ash, who had been quietly watching the encounter, his body tense, ears pricked. The dog's instincts were sharp, and Nolan could feel his own unease growing. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew he had to protect the bakery and the gift it carried. There was more at stake now than just the town's healing. Something was coming, and Nolan had to be ready. With a deep breath, he turned and walked back into the bakery, locking the door behind him. He knew that the bakery had given him a purpose, but with that purpose came a responsibility, one he wasn't sure he was prepared for. But he would do whatever it took to keep the bakery safe and to protect the people who relied on its magic. For better or for worse, this was the path he was meant to walk. The night after the stranger's visit, Nolan sat in the back room of Sugar Pine Bakery, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. The bakery, which had once felt like a place of peace and safety, now felt like a battleground, one where he wasn't sure what side he was fighting for. The stranger's words echoed in his mind. I know exactly what this bakery is, what it can do. What had started as a small-town bakery had now become a symbol of something far greater, something with power that Nolan couldn't fully understand. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the bakery had never been just a bakery. It was a doorway, a conduit for something much larger, a force of nature that had the ability to heal, to change lives, and, perhaps, to destroy. Ash, always by his side, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The dog lay quietly near the door, his ears twitching, alert to any sound that might signal danger. Nolan knew he couldn't afford to ignore the threat the stranger posed. The man had known too much. How had he learned about the bakery? How did he know about the crystal, the hidden chamber, the vials? Nolan ran his hands over his face, his mind racing for answers. He had thought the gift of the bakery was meant to heal, to bring hope. But what if it was something else entirely? What if there were forces in the world who saw it as something to control, to exploit? The bakery was more than just a building. It was a living entity, and it was clear to Nolan that its power was growing. He had unlocked something ancient, something that had been kept hidden for a reason. And now, with the stranger's warning, Nolan felt the weight of that responsibility more than ever. The gift had to be protected. But how? The answer, Nolan realized, might lie in the vials, the amber, gold, and green liquids he had discovered in the hidden chamber. Each vial seemed to hold a different energy, a different type of healing. But what if they could do more than just heal? What if they could protect, too? He needed to understand their full potential. With a sense of urgency, Nolan walked to the back of the bakery where the vials were kept in a wooden box. He carefully opened the box, the faint glow of the vials casting a soft light in the dim room. He picked up the amber vial first, holding it up to the light. It shimmered, the liquid inside swirling gently. This one had felt warm to the touch when he'd first handled it, and he had the distinct impression that it contained the energy of restoration, of bringing things back to balance. But what if it could do more? What if it could shield, protect? Nolan didn't know, but he was willing to find out. He looked at Ash, who stood up and padded over to his side, his eyes full of silent understanding. We have to protect this place, Nolan muttered, as though speaking the words out loud would make them more real. He reached for the other vials, studying them carefully. The green one seemed to pulse with a calming energy, while the gold vial had an intensity to it that Nolan couldn't quite place. The more he looked at them, the more he felt connected to their power, as though the bakery itself was guiding him. He turned to the old journal Mabel had left behind, flipping through the pages, searching for any clues about how the vials could be used. As he read, he came across a passage that caught his attention. When the gift grows, so too does its burden. It must be shared, but not without care. For what is given freely can be taken just as easily. Nolan felt the weight of those words. The gift was meant to be shared, yes, but it had to be protected, too. He needed to be careful. The last thing he wanted was for someone to misuse the bakery's power. But how could he guard it from those who sought to control it? The answer, Nolan realized, might lie in the very gift itself. The bakery had always been a place of healing, a sanctuary for those in need. But now, it was more than that. It was a beacon, a focal point for something much larger than just the town of Northwind Bay. It was time to take action. Nolan gathered the vials, carefully placing them back in their box. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt a sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let the bakery's gift fall into the wrong hands. As he walked toward the front of the bakery, he heard the familiar sound of the door opening. He turned, his heart racing as he saw Lena standing in the doorway. Her expression was serious, her eyes scanning the room. "Nolan, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. Nolan nodded, motioning for her to come in. She stepped inside, her gaze shifting from him to the box of vials on the counter. "I know what you're thinking," she said quietly. "And I think you're right. The stranger, he's not the only one interested in what's happening here." Nolan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Lena stepped closer, lowering her voice even further. "There are others. People who have been watching this bakery, watching you. They know about the gift, and they're not just here for the pastries." Nolan's blood ran cold. "How long have you known?" Lena hesitated for a moment, then met his eyes. "Since the beginning. I've seen the changes in the town, in the people who come here. Something's happening, Nolan, and I think it's bigger than either of us." Nolan took a deep breath, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. "I've got to protect this place," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes." Nolan stood in the bakery, the weight of the conversation with Lena still fresh in his mind. The bakery, once a place of comfort and peace, now felt like the epicenter of something much larger, something he couldn't fully control. The stranger's cryptic words, Lena's warning, and the growing sense of danger all pointed to the same conclusion. The gift of the bakery wasn't just about healing. It was about power, and power always attracted attention. Nolan looked at Ash, who stood silently by his side, his gaze steady and unblinking, as if sensing his owner's rising anxiety. "We need to protect this place, Ash," Nolan muttered, more to himself than to the dog. "I'm not sure who else is out there, but we can't afford to let the bakery fall into the wrong hands." Lena had warned him that others were watching, people who knew about the bakery's true potential. Whoever they weren't just interested in pastries. They were after something much deeper. Nolan had to be ready. He had always believed the bakery's power was a force for good, a way to heal and help the people of Northwind Bay. But now he realized that with this gift came responsibility, and with responsibility came the risk of it being misused. As the days passed, Nolan began to notice more strange occurrences. People came in, asking more questions than usual, and some of them seemed oddly familiar with the bakery's inner workings. One afternoon, as Nolan was finishing up a batch of cinnamon rolls, a man entered the bakery. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that seemed vaguely familiar, though Nolan couldn't place him. The man walked up to the counter, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on Nolan. "Good afternoon," the man said with a smooth smile. "I've heard a lot about this place. People say it has the ability to heal. That's quite the reputation." Nolan's heart skipped a beat. He had heard these words before, from the stranger who had come to the bakery weeks earlier. This man, too, seemed to know more than he should. "What can I get for you?" Nolan asked, his voice steady, but his instincts were on high alert. "I'm just curious," the man said, his eyes never leaving Nolan's. "I've heard rumors about a special energy in this place. Something that makes people feel different, better, like they've been healed." Nolan forced a smile, trying to keep his composure. "We serve good food here. That's all." The man's gaze never wavered. "I'm sure that's true," he said. "But I think there's something more, isn't there?" Nolan felt a chill run down his spine. He had to be careful. He couldn't let on that he knew what the man was referring to. "I think you're mistaken," Nolan said, his tone calm. "The bakery's just a bakery. We do our best to make good food and offer a place where people can gather." The man studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Of course. But don't worry. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just interested." With that, he turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving Nolan standing there, his heart pounding. Something wasn't right. The man's presence, the way he spoke, it all felt off. It was as if he already knew more than Nolan was comfortable with. As the man disappeared into the street, Nolan's mind raced. Who was he? And how did he know so much? It was clear that the bakery's secret wasn't as well hidden as Nolan had thought. But why now? Why were people suddenly showing up, asking about the gift? Was it because of the change in the town? The healing? Or was there something more? Something darker, lurking just beneath the surface? That night, Nolan sat in the back room, going over everything. The journal, the crystal, the vials. Everything was connected, but there were still too many unanswered questions. He couldn't just sit idly by and wait for something to happen. He had to take action. With Ash by his side, Nolan decided it was time to go deeper, to uncover the truth about the bakery's gift and who else might be after it. He had to protect the bakery, and he had to protect the town. The gift of healing was meant for good, but Nolan knew all too well that power could easily be corrupted. He couldn't let that happen. He stood up, determination in his eyes. It was time to find out who was behind all this, and why they were so interested in what the bakery could do. He had to uncover the mystery before it was too late. "Come on, Ash," he said softly, as the dog stood by his side, sensing the change in his owner's tone. "Let's find out what's really going on." The bakery, with all its secrets and its power, was no longer just a place of peace. It was the focal point of something much larger, and Nolan wasn't going to let it fall into the wrong hands. He had a responsibility now, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The next morning, Nolan felt the weight of the decision he had made. The encounter with the man at the bakery had unsettled him, but it had also sparked something deep inside, an undeniable sense of urgency. It was clear now that the bakery's gift wasn't just a blessing for the town. It was a powerful force that had caught the attention of people who didn't have the same noble intentions as he did. As the sun began to rise over Northwind Bay, Nolan stood at the counter, looking out through the bakery's windows. The town was quiet, the streets still empty as most people slept, but Nolan knew that something was coming. He could feel it in the air, like the calm before a storm. He wasn't going to wait for it to hit. He had to be proactive. Ash, who had been lying quietly at Nolan's feet, stood up and trotted over to the door as if sensing his owner's shift in focus. Nolan gave a small nod to the dog and walked to the back of the bakery, where he had kept the journal and the vials. The hidden chamber and the power that flowed through the bakery weren't secrets anymore. But the more Nolan thought about it, the more he realized that the knowledge he had unlocked was both a gift and a responsibility. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help, and not just from anyone. He needed someone who understood what was at stake. The bakery was meant to heal, to bring people together, but there were those who wanted to control it, to exploit its power for their own gain. That wasn't going to happen. Nolan had come to trust Lena, the local park ranger, and now, more than ever, he needed to confide in her. He grabbed the journal and tucked it into his coat before heading out the door. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air greeted him. It wasn't the harsh winds of the storm from weeks ago, but there was a chill in the air, a reminder that the calm Nolan felt was temporary. He walked down the quiet streets of Northwind Bay, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Ash kept close, his nose twitching as they moved through the town. It wasn't long before they reached Lena's cabin, a small but sturdy structure on the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees that gave it an almost secretive feel. Nolan knocked on the door, and within moments, Lena answered. Her face softened when she saw him, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Nolan hadn't missed. "Nolan," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "What's going on?" Nolan nodded, his heart heavy with the burden of the conversation he had to have. "I need to talk to you," he said. "About the bakery." Lena closed the door behind them, and they sat at the small kitchen table, Ash lying at Nolan's feet. "What happened?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Nolan explained the encounter with the stranger, the way he had known about the bakery's power, the unsettling feeling he had left Nolan with. Lena listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as he spoke. When he finished, she took a moment to absorb the information. "So what do you think?" she finally asked. Nolan leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I think we're being watched," he said. "I don't know who the man was, but he wasn't the only one. There are others out there, people who know about the bakery's gift, and they're not here for the pastries." Lena didn't say anything for a long moment. She seemed lost in thought, processing what Nolan had said. Finally, she spoke. "I've noticed things too," she said quietly. "People acting strange, asking questions, some even offering to buy the bakery. I didn't want to say anything, but now it makes sense. The bakery's power, people are sensing it, and they want it for themselves." Nolan's heart sank. He had feared this, but hearing Lena confirm it only made it feel more real. What do we do? He asked. Lena stood up and walked to the window, her gaze scanning the small town. We protect it, she said firmly. We can't let anyone take it. Not just for the town, but for everyone who's come here and found something they didn't even know they were missing. Nolan nodded, feeling a sense of relief that Lena was on the same page. But we can't do this alone, he said. I've been thinking about that. I think it's time we reach out to the others, those who have felt the change, who understand the power of the bakery. Lena looked at him, her expression serious. You mean the townspeople? Exactly, Nolan said. We need to protect this place, and we can't do it by keeping everything a secret anymore. We need allies, people who can help us keep the bakery safe. Lena nodded. I agree, but we need to be careful. Not everyone will understand the full extent of what's at stake. I know, Nolan replied. But we can't keep running from the truth. The bakery has a gift, but it also has a power that's too great for anyone to control. We have to make sure it stays in the right hands. Lena gave a small smile. Well, then, let's make sure it does. Nolan stood up, feeling the weight of the responsibility still resting on his shoulders, but now, with Lena by his side, he felt a sense of purpose. Together, they would protect the bakery and the gift it carried. The town had already begun to heal, but the true test was coming. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Nolan and Lena worked tirelessly to fortify the bakery, to prepare not just for what might come, but for what had already begun. They knew now that the bakery's power couldn't stay hidden forever. They had unlocked something ancient, something that called out to people with darker intentions. Word had spread, and others had taken notice. The bakery had become more than just a source of healing. It had become a beacon, and with that beacon came the inevitable shadows that sought to claim it. They were ready, or at least as ready as they could be. Nolan stood at the counter, watching as the sun began to set, the warm orange glow spilling across the bakery's wooden floors. Ash was lying at his feet, his eyes sharp and alert, as always. There was a sense of calm in the air, but beneath it, Nolan could feel the tension building. There was no turning back now. He had to protect the bakery, the gift it held, and the people who had come to rely on it. As night fell, the bakery's lights flickered to life, casting a soft glow that seemed to attract the weary and the broken, those looking for solace, those who sought something they couldn't name but knew they would find here. One by one, people came in, unaware of the danger that loomed just outside, watching them. Nolan didn't speak much as they entered, his gaze constantly scanning the room, his instincts on high alert. Lena had gone to gather the others, those in the town who understood the bakery's true nature and who were willing to protect it. They would need all the help they could get. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Nolan's heart raced with anticipation. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. And then, just as the last of the evening's patrons left, the door creaked open again, and a familiar figure stepped inside. It was the man who had visited the bakery days before, the one who had known too much. His eyes locked onto Nolan's, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man's smile was cold, knowing, as if he had been expecting this moment for far longer than Nolan had realized. You've made a mistake, the man said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. This bakery, this gift, it's not yours to keep. Nolan stood up straight, his heart pounding, but his resolve unwavering. It is mine to protect, he said, his voice steady. And I will protect it. The man chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down Nolan's spine. You don't understand, he said, his smile growing wider. This power is too great for one person to control. You've opened a door that cannot be closed. And now, you must face the consequences. As if on cue, the air around them seemed to shift. The bakery's warmth, its comforting embrace, began to fade, replaced by a cold, oppressive energy that filled the room. Nolan's grip tightened around the counter, his heart racing as he realized the man's words were not just empty threats. They were a warning. The room grew darker, the light from the candles flickering wildly as if caught in the grip of an unseen force. Ash growled softly, his fur standing on end, his eyes fixed on the man with an intensity Nolan had never seen before. Leave now, Nolan demanded, his voice rising, or I'll make you leave. The man's eyes flashed with something darker, something that sent a wave of fear through Nolan's chest. You don't have the power to stop me, he said, his voice colder than before. You've unleashed something you can't control, and I will be the one to take it. Before Nolan could react, the man raised his hand, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. A gust of wind slammed through the bakery's doors, rattling the windows, and for a brief moment, Nolan thought the very walls would collapse. He felt the power of the bakery respond to the threat, but it was too weak, too new. He wasn't ready. But then, just as the man seemed ready to strike, a voice rang out from the doorway. Stop! Lena stepped into the room, flanked by several of the townspeople who had gathered to help protect the bakery. They were armed, not with weapons, but with the resolve to defend what was theirs. The man looked at them, his expression darkening. You think you can stop me? He sneered. You're just as much a part of this as he is. Lena stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. We may not understand all of it, she said, her voice steady, but we know one thing. This bakery is a part of our town, and we'll protect it with everything we have. The man's eyes flicked to Nolan, then back to Lena and the townspeople. For a moment, the air seemed to still, as if the bakery itself was watching, waiting. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the oppressive energy seemed to dissipate. The man, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief, took a step back. This isn't over, he said, his voice low, a warning rather than a promise. You can't keep it forever. With that, he turned and walked out of the bakery, disappearing into the night, leaving Nolan and the others standing in the sudden silence. As the tension in the room melted away, Nolan looked at Lena, then at the townspeople who had gathered to help. Thank you, he said quietly. But this isn't over. He'll be back. Lena nodded, her gaze steady. Then we'll be ready. Nolan looked around the bakery, the room filled with people who had come together to protect something they all believed in. The bakery was more than just a building. It was a symbol of hope, of healing, and of community. And as long as they stood together, they would keep it safe. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt like he wasn't alone.